Alright, let's try it again. Come on. Welcome to RPG Research and our Researchers in RPG Theory discussion. Now my browser's not. Oh my goodness. Hello. Alright, so we have Eric in Spokane, Dan in Brazil. I got two Erics. Huh. You guys hear me? Okay.
Computer, which one of them is the clone?
Eric, can you hear us?
I see two instances of you as well.
Huh.
Oh.
Alright. Alright. Eric, can you hear us? Eric's disconnected. Alright. He'll be back. He'll be back. Welcome back, Eric.
Hello.
Hello. Alright, good. Oh my goodness. I hope it's not going to be one of those days. So as I said, I got a little bit of head cold, kind of in my sinuses here, and making it a little hard to talk, but I'll do the best I can. And let's see. So, how are you doing, Dan? Did you get any sleep?
Any includes any amount, right?
Yes.
Above zero. Then yes.
Okay. How much did you get?
Enough.
Okay.
I'm well awake. Sorry about the joke.
No problem. All right. I understand about the sleep. Now, I hope your family's doing okay, because I understand you had a family situation some weeks ago, and it has been taking up your time. I hope things are coming back to normal.
Oh, yeah. Yes, everything's fine. I just need to wake up early in the morning to drive my sister to school, and that's why I haven't been able to attend as reliably as I otherwise would have.
No worries. We're all volunteers here, and we do what we can. So, appreciate you making the effort. Let's see. The first thing, boy, now did Omar also say he wasn't going to be able to make it? So I got an email from Jonathan saying he'd be an hour late. I thought I did get something from Omar. Let me double check.
I don't remember anything from last meeting, so.
No, I think I got an email over the weekend from Omar saying something came up, but I got to double check. And Dan, have you met Omar yet?
I'm not sure. Was he during the Twilight 2000 session?
No, he's in Saudi Arabia, so he's one of the reasons why this meeting is at Tuesday morning, because of the time zone.
Oh, no, then I haven't.
Okay. Okay, he's in the hospital. This was an email Sunday. He'll be in the hospital and won't be out till Thursday, so he's going to have to miss the meeting. Should be able to attend November 27th. He'll still thinks he'll be able to write the blog post later this week, so hopefully won't be too much delay. So sorry for the inconvenience. No need to apologize on our end if he's in the hospital. I hope he's okay. I'll ping him back and ask how he's doing. So, yeah, Omar's in Saudi Arabia. He finished a bachelor's in psychology, and I think he had one other topic in there. In Saudi Arabia, they don't have a lot of therapists and such, and he's mostly from a video game, role-playing game background, not so much tabletop or live action. Apparently, they don't do any LARP in Saudi Arabia at all that he's aware of, and tabletop's not common. It's mostly video games. But he's very interested and in the possibilities, and so that's part of why he's on board. Jonathan will be joining us later. I believe he's either finished his master's and working on his doctorate. I think he's finished his master's, working on his doctorate, and he's a teacher out in the Midwest in psychology and other topics and such. So he has a very busy teacher schedule, but he will hopefully be joining us in about 45 minutes or so, half hour, if all goes well. He usually has to leave by 11:30 because he has a class to teach around 12 our time. And so Eric, you're the only one here who's been who's here, who has to work on the essay. Where are you at on your blog posting? Do you have your rough draft ready?
I have about 2 pages written.
Okay.
And it's almost a complete thought.
Okay.
So I just need to tidy up the beginning and the end.
Okay.
But I can send it to you guys for some initial comments if you'd like.
Please, yes, so we can give you feedback after this meeting right away to help you. We might be able to give you some interjections that you may find helpful as you're tightening it up.
Still a bit rough.
That's okay. We'll keep that in mind. Remember, the goal is to have it ready for, semi-final release next Tuesday.
Right.
So next Tuesday is when you guys send it to me for all of us for final peer review, and then we want to try to get it published before the end of the month on the blog.
And it was just a matter of surprise visit from my sister for my birthday, so I had a little less time than I had anticipated.
Right.
Let's see.
So Dan, I don't know if you know. So the researchers, they have a task each month to publish a small blog essay. So it's not as formal as a full research essay, but it still needs to have at least 2 sources and or more, and it's meant to be less formal, thus a blog posting rather than a formal essay posting. But we're trying to get all of our research assistants to do one of those per month. And so the beginning of each month, they'll declare what topic they'd like to cover. I can sometimes point them to resources and such as needed. Then they delve into it. The reason why it's only 2 sources is because I don't want them to get too much time consumed just doing a blog posting. Because it's more important that we bring up these topics for discussion than that they be fully answered as a full research study. So it's a topic they're interested in. It may trigger a full research study for them down the road. It may be that this is what they're going to build towards for their big research project, but we want to at least start the discussion so other people are involved in the process, and both for review's sake and for bringing in other perspectives and other resources, etc. You there, Dan? Did we lose Dan? He's muted. You're muted, Dan.
Sorry, I didn't realize it. I understand. So there's this monthly blog post which everyone's expected to have about a given topic.
Correct. Right, 1 topic per month. Mm-hmm. For each research assistant. They'll each have their own topic that they will pick. And then we help them through that process by giving them feedback and review and such. Mm-hmm. And so Omar was doing it on diversity in, role-playing gaming in a specific subset. Eric, you want to talk about yours briefly?
I'm doing a little bit of research into the concept of bleed. Mm-hmm. Emotional, physiological, psychological bleed or spillover from real life to game or game to real life. I had a group that my significant other was in had an interesting falling out, and I wanted to learn more about the experiences of others and how you can mitigate negative things from happening in your group, and look at some of the positive benefits of bleed as well, which is sort of the idea of therapeutics.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. Being able to do processing and generalization in a healthy way. Yeah.
Yeah. And it just takes a little bit of a look at a little bit of tabletoping, a little bit of LARP, and like I said, we're not supposed to have too many sources, so.
Well, you can have all the sources you want, but I just don't want you to get stuck in analysis paralysis. It's more important.
I know. I tend to get overscoped.
Yeah.
And I already feel like I'm overdoing the blog a little bit. So
it's okay if you want to cover a lot without getting it too deep. Just make that very clear in the blog posting. You can say, this is just a blog posting. I want to go a lot deeper and validate, but here's some of my thoughts on this, and here's a couple of references that kind of that I'm starting with at this point. You can say that clearly in a blog because, again, it's a less formal approach, but it's an interesting discussion because we'll enable comments and people can comment and give you feedback, etc. And the main point is to get the community actively discussing these topics.
Does Dan have an @RPG research email?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. It's on the text chat. If you want to send me your blog post, I'd be curious to see it.
Let me copy that real quick.
Another thing, I recently posted something on the Google group about there's a Brazilian research initiative created by a few communications professionals, and they have a very interesting proposition. They developed their own means of teaching that was at first directed towards communication students, but after a little bit, they started to realize that they created a whole new teaching methodology, and they open it. It's open source. It's on their site. They even linked it on the Google Groups posting.
Right.
And I wanted to look deeper into that because I think there are ties to group dynamics, which could be could have ties to RPG dynamics. Because my whole thesis statement would be that RPGs have the same dynamics as group theater exercise,
right?
Being often a less physical one.
Yeah, and I read your article and checked out their site. And I'm a big open source advocate. Now, so I'm assuming because they call themselves Perestroika, unless in Brazilian that's pronounced differently. Because to me that looks Russian. Perestroika was the big glasnost movement back in the 90s, and it's about having that open conversation and such. Is it mean something else in down in Brazil, or are they using a Russian reference?
No, they're just using a Russian reference.
Okay. All right.
No, they're not KGB infiltrators.
No, I'm not worried about infiltration.
Probably like 2018.
Well, I mean, because I studied Russian back in the 80s and such, and was like, well, that looks really Russian to me, but it might be because of my bias of studying Russian. I didn't know if it might be more Spanish or Portuguese, perestroika or something instead of perestroika. I was curious, so.
Just like loan words in many different languages, generally, unless they're very, very integrated, we pronounce them exactly as they are in their mother tongue.
Right. Okay. So, yeah, and again, that was about... So, it's interesting they chose that because that was the big reform movement of the Soviet Union back in the 80s that, contributed towards the end of the Soviet Union and such. So it's interesting that they chose that. It has to do with freedom and reform and openness, and so that's interesting that they chose that. So I'm curious why they chose that specifically. But yeah, it does look interesting. Did you get a chance to contact them? You said you were going to try to contact them.
I did just yesterday. Okay. I was, it wasn't technically open, but I was able to talk to the regional director in my home city.
Okay.
And it was a very interesting conversation because they said they were generally very busy because at the end of the year they're restructuring a lot of what they do. So further contact will be a little bit complicated, but I do know someone else who I booked a visit, but that's I think in 1 or 2 weeks from now. So probably won't be hearing much of it until then.
Okay.
I do have, full disclosure, a parallel project in which I'm trying to get my drama teacher to contact them so that we can have a conversation about how theater can help them teaching and what we can learn about the course structure to get into the drama class and so on and so forth.
Great.
And I think
yeah, definitely keep us posted. Hang on a second, let's switch browsers. I just realized I opened Firefox, which has the audio issue. I'll be right back. Okay. Hear me okay?
Uh-huh.
Okay, good. All right. Well, that's great. Do definitely keep us posted. I appreciate you finding and posting that to the group. That was very fascinating and I look forward to learning more and hopefully talking to them in the near future. Feel free to update on the email list as you get updates.
Certainly.
Anything else you wanted to bring up, Dan?
Not quite. I'm trying to get in contact with a few coaching professionals in order to. It's more to do with my side project, but I think there are important correlations between the side project and RPG research. Since
Okay.
I like to connect theater and RPGs and all
Sure.
that.
Yeah, you bet. They have a good connection. I mean, that was how I first started teaching role-playing games in high school, was because they lost their drama teacher for a while. The director got an offer to go to Broadway, so, what director is going to say no to that? So they didn't have a drama teacher for a while, and so I proposed, so they were going to just make it a study hall. It was last period, and they're going to make a study hall, and I proposed, well, role-playing game is not too far off. You're taking on roles, and there's a little bit of acting out, etc. Could we do a class on that? And so gave them a full curriculum proposal and taught that 5 days a week back in 1985, give or take. I was at a school for gifted and talented children, but that was where I first started teaching role-playing gaming. And then I've been doing it in different educational places on and off since. So yeah, there's always been a close correlation. The whole term role play ties in with that. But again, it is a game, so it has more structure than your typical improv and drama therapy and things like that. There's the variance. Again, bear with me. I got this head cold and it's making it difficult to talk, but I'll muddle through. Let's see. Yeah, definitely keep us posted. That's very exciting. Did you hear the news about the on the LLC side, just so you're aware of it, about the job positions we need game masters quickly for January for an alternative school, public school?
Yeah, I did hear about that.
Yeah, but due to geographical issues,
I
probably won't be able to fill it.
I understand that, but I just wanted to make sure you were in the loop about it. Basically,
Yes, it was in the group, right?
What's that?
It was in the Google group, right?
I think I posted it there. I'm not positive I posted there. I hope I did. But we've been talking about it. We've been talking about it since last week, so I just want to make sure you were in the loop. So, and that will be, so how in 2015, that's part of why I focus so much on RPG research of late. 2015, I had way more billable work as a recreation therapist and role-playing game, game master and such, all billable work, and it was way more than I could handle, and I went to try to hire people, and I couldn't find anybody that I could, get to work right away, that had the training and the techniques and such down that I needed. So that's when Eagle Peak Public School is the one I'm talking about. So in 2015, I had a lot of different clients, was doing well with it as a paid game master and recreation therapist, etc. But I'd reached my limit. I couldn't take any more clients, and I was having to start turning people away constantly. Every week, I had new prospective clients, and kept having to say no, or you need to wait 6 months because the current contracts were lengthy. And I got really disturbed about how many people I was turning away. One of the biggest ones over at Novelist Mental Health, they handle about between 40 to 70,000 clients, and they wanted me to train all of their staff, and I was just completely tied up. So I did a little bit of coaching and training, and they had some great results, and they still want me to come out there and formally train their staff. I'm just trying to get myself freed up enough to do it, because that'll have a huge impact. But so that's when when I tried to hire people, I posted on ZipRecruiter and Indeed and everywhere, and I was inundated with applications, and nobody was some were not even in the ballpark. So what happened was I got a lot of role-playing gamers with not enough, therapeutic or educational background, or I got a lot of educators and therapists with either zero or not enough role-playing game background. And of course, even if they have both backgrounds and sufficiency, they need to do it to the same standards that, because it's my company on the LLC side, they need to, follow my standards, and that takes a while to train. So that's when it was very clear I needed to back up and focus more on the RPG research side and getting books out and try to get those standards established so that then I could come back to hiring people on the LC side. Still keep RPG research going because we want the research to constantly be happening. So really get RPG research ramped up, get the research going so it isn't just me, so that others are helping get that flowing consistently and building up the body of knowledge. But my hope was by 2019 I'd be able to start ramping back up on the LC side. But instead of me doing all the work, it would be me facilitating others doing all the work, you know, and I'd get a cut for the process, but that they would make a minimum of $20 an hour as game masters, and then if they were therapists and educators, that would, you know, raise the hourly up considerably. So we're on schedule for that. This is the first client I've said yes to in 3 years for a billable service. We went and did the presentation last week, and I told them very clearly, you know, on the volunteer side, you could use RPG research. We could come in once a month for 2 or 3 months to help train your folks and help you run a program and give you, you know, example once a month with our people. But because we're all volunteers, we couldn't do a weekly program because it would burn out our volunteers too quickly. And I couldn't guarantee, because they're volunteers, I couldn't guarantee they'd be there. I said, if you want a more frequent program, then you need to talk to the LLC side. And so talking to the principal and the dozen staff that were there, it sounds like they emailed back the next day, excited and wanting to engage the LLC on the weekly side, and they seemed at least initially okay with the price point. The other thing is they had tried to implement, this is a perfect example of why we're doing what we do. These are people who have lots of experience working with at-risk youth, 4th through 12th grade. It's what they do all day long. It's their profession. One of them is an avid gamer who's been gaming for a long time. They tried implementing an after-school role-play, RPG club, D&D club, and started out okay, and then went horribly awry because a couple of students had a rough day at school, and they took it out through the game, and the game blew up, and it got bad, and they had to terminate the D&D club. And this is where our skills come in so importantly between the research side and the LC side, is we have experience putting these two together and all the caveats and challenges of working with these populations. Just because you know how to work with at-risk youth, and just because you know how to game, doesn't mean you know how to game with at-risk youth in these types of settings. That becomes a subset that you have to develop. We've been doing it for years, and so they were very excited to hear about, because we came in from a much broader, bringing in the neuroscience, the research psychology, and all of that, made them feel a lot more comfortable. Now, will there be challenges? Yes. Working with this population, by definition, at-risk youth means they're a higher risk. They are a challenge to work with. But we have learned about incorporating behavior modification and conflict resolution, picking games that have that integrated so that they're more likely to utilize them in an effective way. I generally do not recommend straight D&D, any version, especially 3rd, 4th, or 5th edition, for this population, as far as if you're supervising it as is. It needs to be modified to work with this population. Thus, we recommend using something like Adventures in Middle-earth, which is layered on top of D&D 5th edition, which has some behavior modification and rules built into it that help discourage some of the disruptive behavior that tends to come up with regular D&D. Regular D&D is open enough that you can play any game style you want to play, but because it's so open, when you're dealing with at-risk youth, they have a tendency to want to, do the murder hobo thing, and also tend to turn on each other a lot too, again, if they have a bad day. You play Adventures in Middle-earth or the One Ring role-playing game, you have to play a heroic character. You get a fellowship focus established, so you have somebody you're buddied up with, even if you don't know them previously. And you have shadow points, so that if you do, bad things, you accumulate shadow points, which means you slowly lose control of your character, which is generally not desired. And again, it's a heroic setting. D&D, it's much more open-ended. You can play good, evil, whatever you want. So it's an important layering. What we learned, too, is I can easily modify D&D to have all these kinds of rules. I have done it. The problem is if they're house rules, when you're dealing with this population, especially when they get to teenagers, they're more resistant if you made the rules as opposed to it being published in the book. If it's in the book, they're more compliant. If it's your own house rules, they tend to be more resistant. Like, well, that's a stupid rule. Why don't you go by what's in the book? That kind of attitude, when they're copying an attitude. So having it built into the game really helps. What's that?
I just wanted to know. Sorry, my headset is giving me feedback, so I'm a little bit confused. So you said that you deal with these sort of population using these mechanics, shadow points, or dark side points if you were playing Star Wars. Are there non-rules, non-mechanical ways that you use to deal with this sort of population and their behavior?
Yes, although with this population, also with Autism Spectrum, they do much better if you clearly define the parameters in advance. So we have, we hand out our own code of conduct that explains how we expect people to behave, how to deal with issues, the escalation process, what repercussions are. It's fairly lengthy, and if we have an ongoing interaction, we cover that up front. So we explain the rules, and it helps them understand what the rules are to play by. For a lot of these kids, some of them know what the rules are and just blatantly decide to ignore them. That's, and it depends on their mood, too, for that day. But a lot of them, it's that they're still trying to get the hang of what are the correct rules to play by, especially Autism Spectrum and others who have a little bit of trouble processing and assessing in the moment. Giving very clearly defined parameters really help. When you spell it out for them, really helps. And you have to do it in a way that's not patronizing. You have to do it in a supportive way. But so that we have a lot of just behavioral stuff we incorporate in all of our games that we spell out in the code of conduct, which just has to do with treating each other with respect. The other things we do, this is where I keep emphasizing voicing. Voicing helps with immersion. So when you speak in a different voice as your character, so when you're discussing meta topics, you're talking to the GM. So what's the room look like? Blah blah blah. Use your normal voice. But when your character is doing something, you'll use your character's voice. And then when you're talking that way, people know it's the character talking, not you. This creates, and this is where Eric's study on bleed comes in. And this is important with this group. You can have good bleed and bad bleed, productive bleed and unproductive bleed. And the voicing helps create an extra boundary and buffer between what the player's saying versus the character's, expression. This allows a character to say something insulting to another character. Now, with this population, you want to discourage that as much as you can, but at least it's character to character rather than person to person. Again, this population, they tend to take everything personally, but the voicing helps a little bit. What's better is when they're dealing with NPCs and such, and they're having an argument with the NPC, and the GM's using voicing, the player's using voicing for their character, they tend to take that less personally. And once they've established a rapport with the GM. I discourage GMs starting out with insulting any of the characters. Give time for them to build trust in the GM before you get into topics that might lead to those kinds of combative discussions in the game. They're totally appropriate in the game over time. But that voicing helps with some of the negative bleed factors and creates that boundary. We also like to use different pronouns. So I try to discourage players from saying, I swing my sword at them, or I tell them to bugger off. I instead try to tell them to either say it in their character, if there's a character speaking, just have their character actually say it. So it's the character speaking, saying, I'm going to bash your head in, right, to the NPC or the orc or whatever. Or if they're describing what their character's doing, their character's not speaking, to say, well, I want him to do this, or I have Rogar the Barbarian do this, and use that, other person pronouns rather than self-referencing pronouns to help, again, create that separation of the character from self. They can still feel the connection to the character vicariously, but making the clear distinction that what the character does is separate from themselves. That also lets them have a safer space to experiment with things as the character that maybe they'd be a little more uncomfortable if people thought it was directly about them. So those pronouns, the voicing, the code of conduct, there's many other factors, but those are some of the top three that we find very useful across the board, and especially with this population that are not games rules specific.
I see. So it's more a formalization of the player-character dynamic in a way.
Yep. Yeah, it's formalization of, it's a lot of things that when you have a good game, it's a lot of things people do naturally that they go, oh, wow, that made my game better. That's what we do, right? We're studying and formalizing all of this. We're establishing standards and process, and we're spelling it out. Stuff that we just take for granted as gamers, we as researchers and such and therapists go, okay, let's dig into this process. What are the dynamics that work and the dynamics that are dysfunctional? And then we spell it out. With this population, it helps so much to have those clearly defined parameters. Every step of the way, if you're spelling out clearly, you can really reduce misunderstanding and conflict. It's never a guarantee. Again, like they did, there's going to be bad days. So far, I have not had anybody from this population when I'm GMing, flip the table or throw a fit and storm off or anything like that. I've had some get upset, but they've managed to calm down and we've been able to work through it. I know it will happen someday, and I know others who are very accomplished therapists who have had that happen to them, not with role-playing gaming, but in other activities. And so it's only a matter of time that will happen at some point. But so far, I've been able to mitigate circumstances that others observing were like, "Wow, you really turned that around." I'm afraid that would have just blown up in my face. So, it's taking those experiences for myself and for others. John's worked with different populations. Our vice president, we have a number of people from different backgrounds. So we draw on all those resources. The key thing is compassion, patience, clearly defined parameters. Those go a long way for working with a lot of these populations to de-escalate them very quickly. You still have to be firm. You can't be a pushover because they'll take advantage of that. But you can be nice and respectful and compassionate about it while still being firm.
That's actually the part that most intimidates me about this kind of work, because I don't generally deal with large groups. And how are we going to train that if, I intend to be a GM?
Well, we do that. We train our GMs. So they don't have to be large groups. Remember, the sweet spot is 4 to 5 players. And we don't recommend much more than that. You start getting 6 or more, it starts to slow down too much. So sweet spot's about 4 to 5 players. You can train as a GM with just 1 player, and then work your way up, slowly adding. We've added Saturday as a GM training day, Saturday morning. Do you know about that?
Uh-huh.
Okay, so that's
when I intend to attend that.
Okay, yeah.
When I'm most free.
Yeah, so 9 a.m. to noon, that's straight GM training. And so each of you, we're going to make sure everybody's gone through the checklist, through the website, the checklist for training. Make sure you're up to speed on the videos and the essays. And then we're going to actually have each of you running a game, and the rest of us will act as players as you get familiar with the baseline games require everybody to learn. And we will coach you through getting that experience. And it can be done remotely. It's a little clunkier remotely because the technical issues get in the way, but it's still done. People do it all the time around the world. Millions of people do it. We can manage. So you will at one point be GM. First, you'll be playing with one of the game masters running a game, and you'll get familiar with the scenario, and we'll give the game master feedback. And then once you've gotten a little bit of time to prepare, you're going to GM, and we will coach you through. So your first session or two for each game is in a safe environment where we're there to help you learn to GM. So that's as safe as it gets, and you'll get nothing but helpful feedback. You won't have to worry about anything blowing up or anything like that. We're there to serve you, to help you learn how to GM. Then, as you get more competence and confidence, we'll ratchet up a little where we'll have our player archetype specialists challenge you. The player archetypes are, we've talked about before: murder hobos, rules lawyers, power gamers, etc. They are okay up to a certain point, but they can become disruptive to a game. And so game masters need to, A, learn to recognize when they have a strong archetype in their group, and B, if they're becoming disruptive, how to de-escalate their disruption. And so you will get practice with our player archetype specialists. I will tell them, one of them to be a cheater, or one of them to be a rules lawyer and try to argue with you and try to bog the game down. And then you'll get coached through how to de-escalate that situation. So this is just like any other profession, and it's very meta, right? Because now we're role-playing within the role-playing game, right? The player archetype specialist is pretending to be, not only their character, but also they're playing the role of a player who is a specific archetype, like, say, rules lawyer, who is playing a player character. So it's very meta, but it helps the GMs prepare. So then once you've gotten a few sessions of those under your belt, you'll always be nervous your first game session in the public, but we'll get you there. We won't push you out there until we think you're ready. And Then where you are remotely, so you obviously won't be able to come up here to Spark Central or other community programs, because that's where we let our GMs get supervised in the wild game sessions. You know, I'm there monitoring constantly, and I can pass post-its to the GM to help coach them, etc., or whisper in their ear. So I'm there helping in these community programs. Since you're remote, what I've done with other GMs is, as long as you can find a group that is okay with either recording or streaming privately to me your game session, I can either watch a live game session and give you feedback real time through the chat, or you can send me a recorded version of your game session, and I or John or the others can review it and then give you feedback, and then you can parallel that feedback to what happened in the game, so you can look at that and say, okay, this is what I need to do differently. We all GMs need to at some point be running a game out in the wild, whether it's their friends or family or a group at a store or whatever. That's the only way you're going to get the experience, is to be running a regular game. We will start you with the regular with some games here, and you'll get a few of those controlled sessions, but then you'll have to step outside the bubble and run a game. Now, do you have any friends or family that are interested? Because usually it's less scary when it's with friends and family, although for some people they prefer strangers. I
do. Most of them are online friends, and I'm not very comfortable with opening the sessions we have due to, they like to remain anonymous.
Okay.
I do. In real life, my sister's friends, they're teenagers. They have an interest in playing games, but my sister wants to GM for them, and I'm not entirely sure the schedule would, make for a good, make it for a reliable session for me. In fact, this is why I GM through networking so often, because there simply aren't very many groups out here. And if there are, they're generally in Brazilian Portuguese, so there's also a bit of a language barrier.
Okay.
I very much prefer to, eventually travel to Spokane and perhaps even GM there.
Yeah, if you can do that, that makes it a lot easier to get you the training. You would be running a game every week once after you did your initial we'll call it in-house training. We would then be able to get you one session a week minimum in the community where you're coached in the wild, and get to apply all those things that you learn in the safety bubble of the in-house gaming. And we have lots of, even though Spokane's small, we have over 800, 900 gamers in the area that we know of. John runs games regularly Wednesdays at Uncle's, which is a game store. There's lots of games here. There's Merlin's, it's a game store. They have several games a week. Gamers Haven has several games a week. John runs his games at Uncle's on Wednesdays. Of course, we have our games. There's plenty of opportunity to run games here, and we can help you find good players and such, and get you that experience. So yeah, if you're able to work that out eventually to move up here. In fact, you're not the only one now. Now there's a guy in California, 40 years gaming experience. Apparently, he's written a lot of modules for Wizards of the Coast and others, and he's looking to leave California because it's gotten so expensive and gone downhill so much. He's talking about possibly moving up here to Spokane to get the training, specifically to get the training and be able to try to make a living as a game master. So that'll be interesting to see if he does. We've had a couple people. We had somebody from Indiana and somebody from Illinois and somebody from Florida so far. They've kind of moved here looking for work, and a couple of them moved here specifically because of the gaming. John or somebody jokingly said last week we might become the Silicon Valley of professional role-playing gaming.
Another thing I'd be interested in would be to attend Eastern Washington University in therapeutic
recreational
therapy, yes.
Yeah, TR, yeah.
I have one question. Are there any visitation procedures that I need to be aware of, or, enrollment?
Well, so if you are out of state tuition costs more than once you're matriculated, once you're a resident. Once you're a resident, the tuition is 1/2 to 1/4 the cost compared to being out of state. So that's something to be aware of. Yeah, there's a whole admissions process. So first you have to just apply to get admitted to be allowed to take any courses at Eastern Washington University. So that's through their website at ewu.edu. And there's just an admissions form you fill that out, and then they'll say and you answer all the questions, and then some weeks later they get back to you saying, your application's been accepted or declined, or we want more information. Then once you're accepted through admissions, then you go through the registration process of registering for the actual classes, picking your degree, looking at the courses specifically you're going to, it's better if you know what you want going in advance. So if you, in the admissions phase, if you say specifically, I want to take the therapeutic recreation degree program, that will help a lot because you're saying you know what you want. They get, most students are coming in straight out of high school and they don't really know what they want, and so they have to coach them through it. I came into Eastern specifically because I did my research because of the TR program, so that makes it a lot easier for admissions and registration. So once you're admitted and they said yes, then you just got to time it right. With recreation therapy, you can come in the middle of the year, but it is designed that you start you start September, beginning of the quarter, September 25th, give or take, and the classes are in order. You can take them out of order, but you'll sometimes feel a little out of the loop with your fellow students who started that September, right? And that's true of any college program that has a connected curriculum. Now, you already have a degree in economics, right?
Yeah.
So the good thing is you probably won't have to take the 2 years of general requirements. They'll probably just give you credit for that, assuming credits transfer. So you'll only have to worry about the 2 years of TR courses, and potentially less if you have any others that you can cross off the list. Also, you can there's summer stuff where they give you opportunities to get a lot of volunteer work and such. So part of the degree requires a lot of applied hours, experience, volunteering, or paid work that applies as part of your degree. So that's the hands-on experience. It's all detailed in the catalog for the recreation therapy degree. What happens, and then of course you have to do your internship. Once you've finished all your classes, you apply for internships, and you do a 16-week internship, full-time. Most of them are not paid, some are paid, but most are not. 40 hours a week for 16 weeks. And you finish that internship. Now, once you finish your degree, your relevant hours, and your internship, you can now sit for the Certified Therapeutic Recreation Specialist test. Now, throughout the country, most people who go through school and go and take the CTRS test, about 70%, 80% fail the first time they take it. Students at Eastern Washington University, only about 30% fail the first time they take it, which is very telling about who has the better program to prepare them. And they're highly in demand around the world. So generally, the thing they will tell you over and over is if you're in Spokane, don't expect to get a therapeutic recreation specialist job in Spokane because the market's flooded because we're, a local university that cranks out many of these TRs. So they say always be open to getting jobs elsewhere in the country and in the world. So people get hired in Australia, China, Europe, and throughout the U.S. From EWU. But anyway, you come out of their degree program with at least 2,000 hours of real world experience, in addition to your degree and certification. That's part of what makes the Eastern Washington University Therapeutic Recreation Specialists so in demand. They have way more applied experience than other programs around the country. And that was part of why I chose it. It just really stood out from the others. And they won an award back in 2010 or so for the best TR program in the country. Like they were acknowledged by the professional body that tracks such things. So, what else? Of course, you've got to figure out where you're going to stay. Luckily, the cost of living in Spokane is pretty average. It's not very high compared to, Seattle and everywhere else, which is very expensive. Spokane's kind of right in the middle as far as costs for the national average. Housing costs a little below average, but overall cost of living is about average, so it's not too bad. The average hourly rate in Spokane's around $22 an hour, so that gives you a little bit of an idea of, what's necessary to make a living here. The minimum, what do they call it, livable amount. So this was a study done by I think MIT or something. You only need to make about $9 to $10 an hour to get by. Minimum living wage in Spokane. You only need $9 or $10 an hour to get by, which is a lot lower than a lot of other places. So these are helpful things to know as far as figuring out rent and stuff. Rent has gone up a little bit. So it's a little higher than it should be, but it's not too bad. Housing costs are still really good. It has a good housing market for a long time. Even when the crash happened, we didn't get hit as hard as other parts of the country. It still had an effect, but all it did is kind of get things back to normal. Yeah, so there's the school part, and then you got to just deal with the logistics of where to stay. Of course, we can help you as far as good places and bad places to stay and affordable places. We can definitely help you as far as trying to figure that out. Generally, if you try to live on campus, people usually do that because they want the college experience, but that's usually a lot more expensive than getting a place somewhere else, either with some roommates or on your own. It depends. So those are all things you have to look at. But yeah, the first step is just getting admitted. You can say, I'm hoping to start in your program, fall 2019 or something like that. So you start the process now, or spring 2019 or something like that. And then it takes them some weeks to get back to you. It takes a while. And there will be often some back and forth. So the sooner you start, if you're seriously interested, the better. It's not a very expensive application fee. I don't know what it is now. When I did it was only like $25. I'm not sure what it is now. But it's not that much. And it just get so that you've been admitted, and then you can do when you know you're going to be able to make it. Now, being an out-of-the-country person, you're going to need to get a student visa. So that's the other part you'll need to take care of through the United States. If you don't have a visa to be here, you'll need to get your student visa. And that, of course, also takes a while, too. I'm not sure what order that has to happen. I don't know if you need to get admitted first and then apply for your visa, or if you need to apply for your visa and then get admitted. To me, it would make more sense that you need to get admitted first and then apply for your visa, but the government doesn't always work logically, so... So those are things you need to find out, is your student visa terms and the admission process. Does that help you?
It's fantastically. Great to have a perspective from someone from a native.
What's that?
Sorry, feedback. Fantastic. Thank you very much. It's good to have a perspective from someone who lives there, so I feel much more confident about making this move.
Good. Yeah, no, well, gladly.
I will.
Yeah, I mean, I moved here in 2004, and my aunt and uncle helped me as far as places, where to be and stuff, so it always helps so much. Some of the others moved here without, they found out about us after they were moving here. And, one of them, they lived in an RV in a field, in a friend's farm through the winter. It was rough with 2 kids, and they had a rough time. They came from Indiana. They gambled everything. And now, because of his training through RPG research, he got a good job at the ARC at taking care of in-home care, developmentally disabled folks using games and other activities. And now he's actually like a team lead and such. He's one of our core volunteers. And it was because of his training in RPG research that he specifically got that job at the ARC. And he's been really happy. He's been really busy, but he was really happy and excited to get that job. So, and now John, our VP, has a job at the county library, and he loves that. And that's why we're now running games at the library as well for the community. We just started that just last week. So, yeah, definitely. We'll gladly help you in any way we can as far as pointing you in the direction to figure out what you need to do. Obviously, you got to do the legwork, but I can point you in the right direction. And if it comes to where to live, I can definitely tell you the better neighborhoods and the worst neighborhoods and what's reasonable and not reasonable rent, etc., etc. So definitely, you won't have to do it on your own, which is a lot scarier.
That's great. Thank you very much for the offer.
You bet. Happily. Let's see. So I'm hoping Jonathan joins us soon. And Eric, did you have anything you wanted to cover?
Nothing on my end.
Okay. Just before we get back into our, I've got a couple things I will cover, and then we'll resume our reading of Robin's Laws of Good Game Mastering.
Hooray.
Although again, I'm having a challenge with my sinuses here. And I only have NyQuil, not DayQuil, so I didn't take anything because I was afraid it would knock me out a little bit. I am going to be, after we finish this meeting today, we do not have any meetings this Thursday or Friday because of Thanksgiving. So this Thursday, there's no talk show, no RPG talk show, and no 6 to 9 applied or theory discussion on Thursday. And then Friday we do not have a community program because Spark Central is closed on Black Friday. We just got confirmation about that last night. So again, for everybody listening, no RPG research meetings or broadcasts this Thursday and Friday because of Thanksgiving. We will have our Saturday 9 a.m. to noon GM training, and we will have our Sunday Twitch show, Heroes of the Mist. The following week, we will have Monday, we will have our 6 to 9 applied and theory gaming, 6 to 9 Monday. But Thursday, John will have to run things the next week, because that's when I'm catching my flight out to Pennsylvania for PAX Unplugged. I'm speaking on a few panels there. And I'll be there till I get back Sunday. So Sunday, John might have to run. I'm going to try to give him enough data to run the game without me. They're in a stage of the game right now where that could be done. So I'm going to try to give him enough data that he can run Heroes of the Mist a week and a half from now, that Sunday, that he can run, because he's assistant GM. And he can cover for me because my flight will still be coming back by the time the show starts. So I won't be back till late Sunday night. So that's kind of what they... Then after that, everything should get back to schedule. But in between all of that, before I get to Pennsylvania, I've got to finish the 30-page book chapter for this book, the next version of, for the RPG Therapy chapter for Professor Datillo, Penn State, Facilitation Techniques and Therapeutic Recreation for the next edition. And it's something I've had, kind of like you, Eric. I've got it all roughed out, and I'm just trying to get it to flow better. I've had it that way for a long time. What happened is I started doing it to the format of his previous edition book, and then he sent me the third edition book, said change it to this format. And I've just been, juggling so many things that didn't get done. There's a couple of chapters in here that are directly relevant, though, to RPG therapy that I really like to point out. Adventure therapy. And let's see, anger management. Expressive arts as therapeutic media. Therapeutic use of magic. Now they're talking, like magician magic for the fun of it, But it's still interesting. So I'll tell you, here's the different chapters in this book. Of course, the introduction, The Age of Enlightenment for Therapeutic Recreation by Professor John Datillo, Pennsylvania State. Adventure therapy, aquatic therapy, therapeutic use of exercise, therapeutic use of sports, therapeutic use of sailing, anger management, expressive arts as therapeutic media, moral development discussions, therapeutic use of humor, values clarification, mindfulness, stress management, therapeutic reminiscence, therapeutic use of magic, therapeutic massage, therapeutic use of Tai Chi, assistive technologies, leisure education, therapeutic use of animals, therapeutic horseback riding, therapeutic use of play. So this book, and so everybody who wants to get their CTRS, their Certified Therapeutic Recreation Specialist certification, has to take a course on facilitation techniques. And okay, where's the book? Where did I put it? Okay, and there are only 2 books. Any professor you have to teach that class as part of your degree program. There are only 2 books available on facilitation techniques in TR. These are the 2 books. So one is by Professor John Datillo out of Penn State, and one is by Norma J. Stumbo here in Washington State. Washington State's a big hub for rec therapy. And these are the 2 books that every professor has to choose between. Currently, here at Eastern Washington University, Professor Messina, who is the head of the TR department at Eastern Washington University, who, by the way, joined our board earlier this year. I don't know if you knew that, Dan.
Oh, I didn't.
She joined our board of directors earlier this year. That's how excited she is about what we're doing.
Nice.
Yeah, it's very, very telling when the head of the TR department joins us.
Just so I know, I have a video off just for, network concerns. Could you post the book titles and the authors on chat?
All right.
If you could.
Yeah, let me do that here. I was showing it to our Twitch viewers. But yeah. Okay, so facilitation of therapeutic recreation services by Stumbo. That's the Washington State one. And that's currently what Professor Messina uses here at EWU because Washington State bias. And then the other one out of Penn State, facilitation in techniques in therapeutic recreation by John Titillo. And you can find them on Amazon and what have you. I think the Titillo book, last I looked, was much more reasonably priced than Stumbo, but it changes. So anyway, Professor Messina says when my chapter in RPG therapy is published in whatever version it comes out in for the Titillo book, she will switch her curriculum for that class to use the Titillo book. But basically, every TR specialist who goes through training is going to get one of these two books in their program. So there's 35,000 recreation therapists out there. There's about 15,000 who are certified. So assuming that those numbers continue over a certain period of time, that's thousands of recreation therapists who are going to get exposure, especially if they get the Titillo book, to the RPG therapy chapter. So that will be awesome. I just got to get it done. So my plan is, after we're done with the meeting today, I'm just going heads down, just trying to pound this chapter out this week, but at least before my flight, try to just get it done and submitted a final review draft to him, so I can have it. And hopefully, I'm going to try to meet with him while I'm in town. His schedule may be too busy, but we'll see, to see where that's at. These books take a long time to process out, and I may have missed the deadline for the next version, so it might be the version after, who knows. But I'm bound and determined to at least get my submission completed in the next, before I catch my flight. That'll finally be off the plate. It's been hovering over me a long time. Any questions about that?
No, just thank you for typing out the book.
What's that?
It really captures. Thank you for typing out the book titles and the authors. It really helps with searching them out.
Yes, well, if you want to know a few books, if you want to get a head start, like John Welker's, I helped him by getting copies of some of these books, and he's been borrowing them and reading them in advance because he wants to get a CTRS as well. There are, 3 books that are just, we base our programs heavily on. So these are the 3 most important ones, not counting introductory books and such. So let me grab them and I'll run them by you. And some of them I need to get newer versions, but okay, so I get that. Where's my cookbook? There's the cookbook. Now all the others we reference and use, but if you had to only get 3 books, these would be the 3 I would say to get. Related to recreation therapy. So one, and this is broken into three smaller books, but is Recreation Therapy Handbook of Practice, ICF-based diagnosis and treatment. And what this has is all of the World Health Organization ICF codes, International Classification of Functioning, and ICD codes, International Classification of Disability. For example, the World Health Organization just added video game addiction to their ICF codes earlier this year, which was a big controversial thing. And what you do is let's say you have a client come in. So often, as a rec therapist, you don't have to do a ton of assessment. Often they've come in and already gone through assessment with a physical therapist or a general practitioner or other specialists. And so you're just given the paperwork on what their level of functioning is and what the goals are for this client to get better, whatever it is, whether it's mental health, physical health, social, spiritual stuff, whatever. Because recreation therapists are very holistic. We look at the whole person. And so you already get a lot of assessment info. So a lot of recreation therapists only have to do assessments specific to the activity you want them to engage in. You often we work as teams, and so a lot of that is saved. You don't have to do the heavy assessment that like a physical therapist or general practitioner might have to do. However, if you want them to engage in activity, you need to know what their level of functioning is for that activity, is for their baseline, and then because you've got to show measurable results, right? The nice thing about recreation therapy is you can get paid to use games and recreation to help improve people's lives. Other professions, insurance companies don't reimburse for that. Recreation therapists, that's what we get reimbursed for because it's what we do, both in groups and one-on-one. So you need to know what their level of functioning is. And so this book helps you get a feel for making an assessment and documenting what their baseline function is at, and then showing their progression, hopefully progression, or if it's a degenerative disease, like muscular dystrophy or Alzheimer's, showing the level of decline, but hopefully trying to slow that down. And then you from this assessment of functioning, you can then start figuring out your program plan. So this helps you get a feel for the coding that you do that is used a lot in the field. And you'll do this all the time, write things in code. Every medical profession has to do that. To get the assessment, so let's say you do need to do the assessment to figure out where they're at. Some of it you can just do observationally, but to do so more scientifically, and this is what we use a lot of our research from, you need formal, valid, and reliable assessment tools. So the Red Book by Joan Burlingame, also here in Washington, is the Assessment Tools for Recreation Therapy and Related Fields. So the previous one's the Blue Book, or Blue Books, and then this one's the Red Book, when you hear me reference these. This, and you'll see I've got this heavily bookmarked. We use a lot of these assessment tools. So leisure interest motivation, cooperation and trust scale. No, that's not good. Had water in it, not good. Let's see. These are just some that we've used frequently. Measuring attitudes, functional skills assessment, inpatient rehabilitation facility memory assessment, assessment of leisure and recreation involvement, State Technical Institute's leisure assessment process, the STLAP, vitality through leisure assessment, the bus assessment. Like if public transportation is an issue, you can figure out what their level of knowledge and experience with using public transit is. I mean, some of these things are very hands-on, real-world skill sets that you need to know, and others are more abstract. Brief cognitive rating scale, etc. So, and the nice thing about this book is they've done research on each assessment tool using other assessment tools to figure out validity and reliability. So are the results giving you information that are valid to what you're trying to test for, right? Are you actually getting results related to what your goals are? And are you getting consistent results if you hand it from person to person, practitioner to practitioner, facility to facility? Are the results going to be interpreted pretty consistently from place to place? Generally, a 0.6 or better correlation, 0.8 is really great, but a 0.6 or better is good reliability and validity. They measure each separately, validity, reliability, and different types of validity and different types of reliability. So 0.6 to 0.8 is pretty darn good. You get anything above 0.8, that's golden. And then anything below 0.6, 0.4 is not useless. That has value, but you start getting into maybe you could find a better tool. Sometimes you can't. So this is a very, very useful. And so we use this, and then we've also used it for some of our own tools that we've created for assessment, which have not been through the validity and reliability test yet, but I hope someday we can do that. So that's the Red Book. So you got the Blue Book and the Red Book. Then we have what's known as the Cookbook, because the cover looks like the Betty Crocker cookbook from that those of us who are older all grew up with. I don't know if it looks like it anymore, but in the field, everybody calls this the cookbook. It's orange with different patterns. And this is the Therapeutic Recreation Program Design Principles and Procedures by Stumbo, also in Washington State. And this one you'll see is really heavily, I have a ton of bookmarks in it. So every time I design a program plan for a client, whether it's on the research side or the LLC practice side, I'm flipping this book open as a reminder all the time. This has a great template. It walks you through step by step everything you need to know to have a nice, complete, beginning to end. APIDE, we have a concept called APIDE. Have I covered that with you guys at all?
I just faintly remember you referring to it, but I'm not sure if it was explained.
Okay, that's fine. And because we're going to reiterate, you're going to hear me repeat stuff a lot so that it sticks. So APIDE is assessment, planning, implementation, evaluation, and then we also add D for documentation and R for reassessment and re-implementation, but mostly reassessment. So APIDE R, or just APIE, is the base. And so we go through and we assess what the client and facility. So let's say you're working for a big facility. So for example, Novice Mental Health is one. I'm going to do an assessment of what their facilities are, right? What they have available, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm going to do an assessment of the clients we're going to work with there. So I'm going to have, at-risk youth in an inpatient drug rehab with mental health issues. So now I have to do an assessment not only of the client that I'm going to work with, the person who has the drug rehab issue. I also need to do an assessment of, because I'm being contracted out, of the facility I'm working with and what the resources are. So I'm going to go through all this assessment. And then once I've assessed and I have the data, now I can do the planning stage. And there's a kind of an iterative process there, because when I'm doing the planning, I might go back and go, oh, I forgot this question. Could you answer this, this, and this? But once you get through that, now the planning stage, if you put 80% of your effort into the assessment and planning phase, generally only 5, 10, 20% of your effort would actually be the implementation, as far as having to spend a lot of time. And then you go through afterwards and evaluate how it went. Now you look at the scores on how the clients are doing over time. Did they show improvement? Was this the right activity for this population? Did this meet the needs of the facility you were working with? Are they happy with it? Go through and do that evaluation to make sure that your program worked, and then document it, and then go back through the whole process again, from the evaluation. Almost always your evaluation will show areas for improvement. And so you'll say, okay, let's try tweaking this. So you'll go through another assessment and planning phase to make the tweaks. Then you'll implement, and then you'll reevaluate. And you just keep going through that iterative loop. So these are the 3 most critical books for TR in daily use, as well as all the theoretical concepts and such. It doesn't get as wide in the theory as some other books. These cover theory that are very applicable. TR is a very hands-on profession. That's part of the problem why they have too few researchers, is a lot of people come in because it is so hands-on. They really like that aspect. They get to directly help clients, but that makes it difficult to make enough PhDs out there. And I've been getting a lot of grief about that. The current PhDs are like, you have the equivalent of a PhD, why don't you go for it? We really need more PhDs to teach these programs. Well, the problem is I don't like the politics of the university system as a teacher. I've been a teacher at other colleges and such. I love teaching. I love the light coming on and helping people do stuff, but I can't stand the university politics. I have zero tolerance for it. So that's why I've done a lot more independent stuff. But so that is a challenge. I also have a theory that Professor Messina and I hope someday to do a study on, that there may be a higher prevalence of people with ADHD in the TR profession because of self-selection of profession. So it used to be theorized, and I think we talked about this before, it used to be theorized that ADHD went away as an adult. And for some people it may be the case that the symptoms are reduced enough. But what they found really happened is once you get out of school, you select professions and lifestyles that fit your strengths and avoid the areas that you're weak. So with ADHD, sitting still and reading and writing all the time might not be your favorite activity. Maybe you like to be a lot more, if you're hyperactive, much more active. So you're more likely to choose a profession that is something you enjoy, that has you more physically active and maybe is changing things up and isn't the same thing over and over. Now, all of a sudden, they don't seem to have ADHD. Everything seems they don't have problems. They're not late for work, and they're able to stay on task, and all these things are great. Oh, well, the ADHD must have gone away. Well, if you go stick them back in a classroom, you find out very quickly, oh, no, it didn't. It is still there. As they've developed and myelination and everything else has happened with their brain, they might be having a reduction of symptoms. Their executive functions are better. They may have developed some coping mechanisms and tools that help them get through. But it is still very much there as an adult, is what research now has established. for a lot of people. And recreation therapy, because it's so flexible and varied and generally very hands-on and active, most of the professors I've had have said they've either been diagnosed or believe they have ADHD. and I've run into a lot of other rec therapists who say the same thing. Now, that's anecdotal information. That's not good research at all. So Professor Messina and I propose that someday we might do a study to send a questionnaire out to all the certified recreation therapists and try to find out statistically if there's any higher prevalence on average in ADHD in TR profession compared to other professions where these studies have been done. So just something, a side note there that might be interesting. Comments and questions, please.
About the ADHD thing, we're talking about actual diagnosis, not self-diagnosis, right?
For the assessment, we would put different checkmark selections between: were you formally diagnosed by a facility that specializes in such diagnosis? Were you diagnosed by your general practitioner, because those tend not to be the best diagnoses? Or are you, or do you just believe it but have not been formally diagnosed? So we would have a check mark to let people decide what level they're at in their belief that they're ADHD or not. And we could then cross-reference that data effectively.
That's great. I think that lots of people in social media often self-diagnose about things, and then people who actually have this thing say, no, this is completely different.
Right. Yeah, there's
a little bit weird.
It is. There's a lot of misdiagnosis and overdiagnosis. So, for example, general practitioners often will give a kid who's struggling in school, the parent describes everything, and then the general practitioner says, oh, they must have ADHD. Here, let's give them Ritalin or Dexedrine or whatever the latest version of that is. Concerta, blah, 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 Adderall, etc. And if they get better, then maybe they did have an ADHD diagnosis, maybe not, but generally it's pretty obvious. If they don't get better, they might still stick to the ADHD diagnosis, even though that might not be the accurate diagnosis. It could be ODD. It could be autism, which is not the same as ADHD. They have similarities, but there are differences. It could be a whole slew of other issues. It could be early manifestation of bipolar, and that during manic periods they're highly distracted and argumentative, etc. There's a whole slew of other things, and general practitioners aren't trained to do a proper differential diagnosis for those kinds of mental health issues. So you need specialists. Good general practitioners are going to refer them to a specialist who can do the diagnosis. So here in Spokane, we have a great organization called, now it's going to fall out of my head, Neuroeducation. Let me see if I get the website right here. I believe this is it. Yeah, neuroeducation.com. So they're a bunch of PhD psychologists, psychiatrists, etc., who have used the established, formalized, correct methods of assessment to figure out the whole range of learning disabilities, cognitive disabilities, ADHD, all of them, to get an accurate assessment of where your student or adult is at. So I came to Spokane and was going to go back to college after a long absence, and I've had a number of struggles in academic settings as a youth. I'm definitely ADHD, and I went through neuroed, which was very fascinating. I really enjoyed it because I love the research side and assessment side, and learned I had two other learning disabilities I didn't know about. I'd never heard of before. One was dysgraphia and one was dyscalculia. Dysgraphia affects your fine motor skills, makes it hard to write well, and makes your writing shaky and uneven, etc. So I basically have doctor's handwriting right off the bat. And then dyscalculia affects is basically like dyslexia for math and sequencing. So it was really frustrating back in 6th grade because I love science and I wanted to be an astrophysics engineer. And I wanted to design spaceships and all of that. And I come from a family of engineers, mining engineers, geological engineers, etc. And I never had trouble with the mathematical concepts, and it all seemed to make sense logically, but every time I had to do it in my head or up on the board or whatever, especially in a group setting, I would bomb math starting about 6th grade. And it was so frustrating. We didn't know what was going on because in private assessment and on my own, I could do really well. But every time in the classroom, I just bombed it. And eventually over time, I basically kind of gave up on the idea of going into an overly math-heavy profession because clearly I was, having issues. We didn't know anything about this back in the 70s. And I'd barely gotten the diagnosis with ADHD. So, and the medication helped with the classroom behavior and focus helped wonderfully. It didn't help with the math. The math was still an issue. And the handwriting. So as an adult, I learned in my 30s, my early 30s, I'm 48 now, that this dyscalculia was a thing, which also strangely explained a few other things. I've studied martial arts since I was 4. Kung Fu, Aikido, Taekwondo, Karate, Judo, but mostly various forms of Kung Fu and Aikido. And I did really well. I started young. I got really great training in California in the Bay Area. I had a really good touch. Being tall, I had a really good long reach. I had good control. My sifu, my masters, my senseis would use me all the time to demo because of my control, and I was a pretty accomplished martial artist. And the one thing that drove my teachers nuts and me was I could do all of the application of martial arts beautifully, all the explanations, the history, all these things, but my forms, my katas, I always struggled with the order of the moves, right? It took a while for it to get into muscle memory, but I always seemed to struggle more with that than my peers. Just that part. Everything else I was great. My reflexes were superior. For being a big guy, I was way faster than you would expect. But my forms, that was always where I struggled the most, was getting my forms down in the right order, especially as I did more and more and more of them, and you get confused between some of them. Apparently that's another symptom of dyscalculia, is that sequencing, doing things in the right order. So that was an interesting discovery. The dysgraphia, boy, I wish we'd known about it back in the 70s. So I was going to a Catholic school run by a bunch of nuns from Ireland who still basically were on Vatican I, not II, and basically still believed in corporal punishment. And because my handwriting was shaky and uneven, they frequently hit me at my hand with a ruler or the back of my head with a yardstick to try to get me to improve my handwriting. And it never improved. I tried so hard. That was starting about 3rd grade through about 8th grade. Well, it turns out it was dysgraphia. It's like telling somebody with muscular dystrophy or cerebral palsy, write better. There's only so much you can do when you've got a neurological disorder here that interferes with that. The double whammy is the best way to deal with the math issue with dyscalculia is write everything out, right? Show all your work. Don't do it in your head. It's because with dyscalculia, if you do the math in your head, you get things jumbled. It's like, again, it's related to dyslexia, but for numbers and sequencing. So the best solution for that is to write it out. The problem is with dysgraphia, while you are writing, it requires so much cognitive processing power. You can't take notes. So I learned very quickly, I can type well, but if I had to handwrite notes in class listening to a professor while I'm writing, it blocks taking in new data while I'm doing the writing. So I kept finding I was missing about 1/3 of what the professor was saying whenever I took notes. And it was really frustrating. But if I switch to typing, which is less fine motor skills, it's still a little bit, but it's closer to automatic activities. I could get to the point, if I didn't try to filter what was said, if I just basically transcribed the entire lecture, because I could type really fast, I could capture everything. And then from that, on my own, could go through and create my own notes. Or if I recorded it and then could start and stop and make my own notes. That was a solution for that problem. But for math, the problem is while you are doing the writing, it's interfering with doing the calculating at the same time. So it became a challenge. And what I found there is I need to do math alone. And the big trend for decades has been more and more group math. Eastern Washington University, they wanted me to do all group math classes for my degree. And I'm like, no. So I did it through online so I could do it on my own. I do great with self-study. I have my computer science degree, I have a 4.0. I was able to work on my own for the most part. I do great, and I do fine with the math and everything if I'm left to my own devices. But most schools are not set up that way. So that's been my own personal challenge there. But neuroeducation, they found these things very clearly. in a very controlled assessment way. And then we did the same thing with my two of my sons, and found, you know, variants of different things with them as well. So that's a really great resource. So if it's a professional, certified, well-trained assessment organization like neuroeducation, you get good data and you can have pretty good confidence about the diagnosis, including ADHD and such. The problem is they are expensive. An assessment is a minimum $2,000 and can easily, you know, double or triple that to go through the assessment process. Part of that is they have to pay for the assessment tools. Every time you apply some of these assessment tools, you have to pay. Some assessment tools are $1. Some assessment tools are $500 per patient. Some of them are $1,000. They can be very expensive to use. So that's part of the reason why not everybody can go through that. And insurance companies often won't pay for this level of specialization. So then at that point, they just got to kind of rely that the general practitioner has some idea about whether this is actually ADHD or not, or other diagnoses. So that's why we would want on the questionnaire, did you have a specialist in ADHD and or learning disabilities diagnose you? Did you have a general practitioner diagnose you? Or is this a self-diagnosis, you know, from yourself or friends or something? We would definitely want that clearly denoted, because there are a lot of undiagnosed people who really do have ADHD. They really do struggle, but they couldn't afford, or for whatever reason didn't have the right support system to get a proper diagnosis. So we don't want to discount it offhand, and that's why we'd want the variant of that information. Questions, comments?
I'm sitting here wondering how you've managed to GM games when you have both of these conditions. Because it said that when you type it out, it's better, but if you type it out, you hit a screen. And you said that when you have a screen on a role-playing game, you immediately lower the version of the game.
Yeah, I don't type out. For a role-playing game, I keep a roster. So I have a I'll show you one this is from the Twilight 2000 game yesterday. I know you can't see it, but I'm going to show it to the general public, and then I'll describe it. So I always create a roster. I take some graph paper, and I get everybody's data that I think is going to be relevant throughout the game. And this helps everybody. So I'll have like the name of the player character. I try to do the character first and then the player name below that, because it helps to start referencing their character. Then I'll have, in this case, it's Twilight 2000, so it's a military game, their rank, their branch, their specialty. Then another column I'll have some of their special skills that are useful, like medical, scrounge, forage, recon. I'll have what position they're in and location. I'll have their condition that they're in, you know, whether they're functioning or disabled or wounded, what have you. I'll have their coolness under fire rating to see if they panic under certain situations. I'll have a list of their weapons, so I have some idea of their ranges and damage that they could do. And then I'll have other skills that are important that come up over time, and stats about their equipment. Also, languages that their character speaks, so that if they overhear a conversation, I can say to that player character, by the way, your character overhears in Russian, blah, 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 blah. So this roster is invaluable for helping me keep track of statistical stuff, and I usually ask it at the beginning of the first session. And then if other stuff comes up, I add it to it. But this way I don't have to do that much. I don't do much writing during the game. I track things, but it's minimal. And the math is easy. Gaming math is a piece of cake. Part of that is because I've been gaming since I was, 7, 8, 9 years old. So some of those are just, basic math I don't have a problem with, as long as you don't make me have to do too much in my head at too high a level. If I have a little calculator handy here for more advanced games like Rollmaster and such, where there's a lot more calculations, if I have to do some, division and such, then having a little calculator handy can help with that when necessary. All these modern games, it's such first grade math, it's not even an issue. As I said, it didn't even start to become an issue till 6th grade. So it only becomes an issue for more complex stuff. What's interesting is I still score on assessment tests. So if 50 percentile is the national average, right, for everybody who's taken whatever this test is. So that's the exact average is 50 percentile. Most of my testing, I'm 98, 99 percentile. And then math, I'm 69 percentile. So still a little bit above average, but that's a huge deficit. This is part of why they realized there was something not right, because cognitively I should have been much higher for math because I scored very high on logic and everything else. And yet, when I took the actual math tests, I was only getting 69 percentile. Again, above average, but nowhere near where I scored on everything else. My oldest son, I didn't know this was possible. He scored 100th percentile on logic. I didn't know you could get 100th percentile. I thought 99 was the limit. He scored the highest score ever for logic for that assessment tool in the U.S. But that's a double-edged whammy for him, because if he starts with a logical fallacy, he can logic himself into really bad situations. So just something, logic is a double-edged sword. I part of it's practice. I gamed enough, but it can trip me up sometimes, and that's why I have to exert more effort to stay more organized in advance. I have to put in more effort than somebody else might have to accomplish the same task initially. But like anything, our brains are incredibly adaptive, and the more we do something, the better we get at it. And so that's how I've been able to do all this over time. And the gaming has made me better at it. My math is probably better because of gaming. In fact, I'm sure of it. Research supports that. Because if you do the activity over and over and over, you're just going to get better at it. But yeah, having mechanisms that help. John has a great technique with tracking initiative, where you have this little mini character sheet that you fold up into a little tent, and then you put it on your screen, and then you put them in order for each PC, their initiative, and you can move them around. It's a really effective way for tracking initiative in scenarios. So that's something we've incorporated. It's been very handy. So using these techniques can really help. Some game masters, they can track all this stuff in their head, no problem. I have to have some of this written down or it will get jumbled. And so those are some of my coping mechanisms. And they tend to help a lot of other people too. They tend to make it less daunting for people that may not have the same, processing power and such, and make it still be manageable to handle the game. Thoughts and comments?
Sometimes I find myself in a situation where your comments are so thorough that I can't really comment without being superfluous. But then it results in awkward silence.
Okay. Eric, do you have anything to say? Hello, Eric. Do you need to refresh, Eric? Nope. Yeah, he's refreshing. Eric is refreshing. Welcome back.
Refreshing.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't know why my voice just randomly cuts out at some point.
It says you're having connectivity issues. Jitsy's saying that.
Jitsy always says that.
Well, it doesn't do it to everybody.
I don't really have anything to comment on there.
Okay. Did you find any of that useful information?
Yeah, I definitely do.
Okay.
Find all of it very useful.
Good.
I just have a little bit less background in all of it. So
Sure.
I tend to be more absorptive in these meetings than
Of course. That's
productive.
That's part of the purpose of the meeting. So I'm going to do a quick quiz for both of you, and I'm going to alternate back and forth between the two of you. So I'm going to start, just because you're newer to it, Dan, I'm going to start with you. What is the acronym I just used as far as organizing a recreational activity? Without the definition, just the acronym. It's either 4 letters, 5 letters, or 6 letters, depending on how much you want to include.
I've only really called API, but I think
Good.
it was API-R, and then there were some other things which you added on top.
Close. You're only, yeah, you're close. Eric, you want to give it a stab?
Starts with a P.
Nope. Dan was right as far as how it starts.
Really?
Yep.
Okay, well then I'm just completely off base in my brain right now.
Okay.
Apologize.
So API is the first 3. That is correct. E is the 4th one. Then the 2 that are tacked on are D and R. So APIE is the core, and then the optional So APIE is core, and then the optional D and R. So, with that, Dan, what does the A stand for?
Assessment.
Correct. Eric, what does the P stand for?
Planning.
Correct. Dan, what does the I stand for?
Implementation.
Yes. Eric, what does the E stand for?
Ooh, evaluation.
Yes. Dan, what does the D stand for?
I'm not sure, actually.
Okay, Eric, do you want to take a stab at it?
This one's eluding me too. Dissemination. Why not?
No.
There's something out there.
Documentation.
Oh, yeah.
Very, very important documentation. And Dan, what does the R stand for?
I also didn't catch it.
Okay, Eric?
Is it reevaluation?
Yes. It can be reevaluation, reimplementation. It just basically starts the loop over reassessment, etc. But it's just basically re. So reassessment, reimplementation, reevaluation. But it's mostly reevaluation. Just evaluate, document, keep evaluating your program. You'll go through API, and then you'll keep doing document, you keep doing E, D, and R, E, D, and R as a loop as well. Because you want to keep measuring the progress of both your clients and how they're progressing, as well as your program, how overall your program is doing, what your success rate is overall. So let's try that again. Dan, what is the full 6 letters of the acronym for creating an activity?
API-EDR.
Correct. And Eric, I'm going to have you repeat it as well because it just helps to do the process. What's the full 6 letters of the acronym for doing an activity?
API-EDR.
All right. Good. So, and that's application, or excuse me, that's assessment, programming, implementation, evaluation, documentation, and reassessment. So, or reevaluation or reimplementation, but just basically that is, what's that?
It's programming and not planning.
Pardon me?
The P stands for programming and not planning.
What do you mean?
Hear me?
Did I say it wrong?
You said programming, and I'm confused because I wrote it down as planning, and I'm not sure which one is right or if there's a nuance.
No, it's planning, but it's program planning.
Oh, right.
So it's planning, and I might say program planning, and I might say sometimes programming, and that's my bad for my techie side. But it is planning. For API, thank you for catching that. So for API, it is planning. Assess, plan, implement, evaluate. And it's just one of many different methodologies. It's not the only one we use. But it's a good one to use as a guideline. It's an easy one as a baseline. It's used a lot in nursing as well as recreation therapy and other fields.
And the DR is just there to make it an iterative process.
Iterative loop,
right?
Exactly. The R makes it a as in an iterative loop. So you can, sometimes you'll be reassessing, and then replanning. Sometimes you'll be re-implementing. Often it's just reevaluating. You'll just keep reevaluating how your program is doing and how they're doing. And so it just depends upon where you are. If you've got a pretty stable program that doesn't change much, then it's just evaluating and reevaluating for that so it will vary. And it is part of what we do, so our programs follow that process. And it is required, by the way, for the CTRS. It's part of the certification test that you know that thoroughly. And if you look at the books, the red book for assessment, the blue book, and the cookbook to help with the planning to prepare you for the implementation. And then you can come back to the red book for the for the evaluation to see if it's coming, if you see any noticeable changes from your initial assessments. And then all three help you with the documentation. So, as I said, those 3 books pretty much cover the whole process. There's lots of other great books in addition to, but as I said, if you had to have only 3 books, those would be the 3 to have. The facilitation techniques, if you could have 4 books, then you'd want something like the facilitation techniques and such, because it gives you very specific ideas and examples of programs that you can just clone to your own needs. All right. Let's see here. By the way, remember how we were suppressed by Google?
Yeah.
It's fixed for now, anyway. If you type RPG space research in Google, we're back to number 1.
Let's see about that. Oh, look, it is back.
Yep, we're back where we should be.
Good.
RPG therapy is still only back to 2nd place. Right now, it's getting beaten out by Geek and Sundry posting, but that should change over time as RPG therapy gets more active again. It's usually been number 1 for the keywords RPG space therapy. Right now, it's number 2 because of this Google hit that happened inexplicably. But I'll take 2nd place for now. That's okay. But yeah,
Better than no place.
Exactly. I lost a lot of time getting all that fixed and working, and now I'm going to be deleting my business listings from Google Business, so that hopefully that doesn't happen to me again, because they're penalizing me for having multiple businesses at the same address. So hopefully that will not happen again.
Comment about the assessment of these programs. It's interesting to see that during my acting course, we sort of use the same methodology, though of course we don't document it as thoroughly or as scientifically. We generally have an idea of where the student is, how good and open and clear their voice is, how their body language works, their quirks when they're interpreting a character, and how well they can adapt to different scene ideas and propositions. And as teachers accompany students, they often note, oh, you're being more open with your voice, you're being more confident in the scene, you're adapting better to different types of characters, you're not being just stuck on this typecast, stuff like that. Do you think it has a... Oh dear. Do you think it's correlated to therapeutic recreation in a way, as far as dynamics go?
Sure, of course. Yeah, I mean, these are kind of universals, so that they're applicable across interests, definitely. And remember, recreation therapy tries to cover all recreational activities. Theater is considered a recreational activity, right? If you're doing it for fun and enjoyment and social interaction and get all these benefits, it's considered in the bailiwick of rec therapy. You have rec therapists who run theater programs for youth and adults to help with their programs, to get better or whatever their goals are. Same thing with music. There's a specific profession of music therapy, but what's really funny is if you look at, because I'm both music and recreation therapy, if you look at the music therapy programming, it's almost identical to recreation therapy, except for the music theory part. If you take out the music theory part, almost everything in music therapy board certified program is identical to the rec therapy program for certification and training. The only difference is the music theory. This is because both recreation therapy and music therapy started evolving around the same time, around the 1800s, but most notably World War I, when you had the soldiers recovering in the hospitals. The nurses would do things, come up with games and play guitar and do music with them to help them with the recovery process. And what they found was the wards that had nurses that did that, those wards had a much better recovery rate. The soldiers recovered faster and were back in duty or discharged sooner and just had a much better long-term prognosis, short-term and long-term prognosis, than the wards that didn't. So that was the roots of both recreation therapy and music therapy at the same time. So they have an awful lot of parallels. And a lot of recreation therapists do music therapy as well, if they have a music background to tie in. So there's a lot of overlap there.
That's what really fascinates me and what makes me want to pursue this whole perestroika lead. Because since they arrived independently, and yet their methodology still has many commonalities with what we're seeing here,
Yep.
I think there's a lot of potential for, analyzing things as they are now, having a new educational paradigm, in a way.
Well, part of that's because through research you find out these are universal. These are universal. If you keep finding what works over and over and over and it's repeatable, and other things don't work as well, then you're going to find these conclusions that makes total sense. If they're effective, you're going to run into that, and then eventually they will merge over time usually. So yeah, it makes sense in hindsight. Of course, it's always in hindsight. Anything else you want to say on that, or anything else you want to bring up?
Not really. Just wondering when we're going to get to the theory and RPG side of things. I'm not sure if this is a digression or a prelude to what we're going to talk about.
This is all related because, for example, now that you know APIDE are, when we're going through the Robbins Laws of Good Game Mastering, I'm going to ask you, so what stage is this at? So when we started out, he talks about doing an assessment of your players. And he has a very simple assessment form with the player goal chart of the player, the type of player, and their emotional kick. That's the assessment phase. So he keeps bringing up assessment in this. Then we get to, let's see, we stopped with the research group. We covered picking your rules set. So we're still kind of in the assessment and planning phase here, where you're assessing what your players like and what you like, and now you're planning which rule set do you want to use for your game. And then, so we're going to delve into that further because that's where we're at so far, according to my bookmark here. And then we'll consider whether to use homebrew rules versus published rules. Then we'll get to campaign design. So now we're in that design/planning phase. And so there's a lot of info there, and again, it pulls back on assessment information. Then adventure design, because that's more specific than campaign design. And then that you might establish player goal charts. So again, some of the assessments coming in, because it's iterative. Preparing to be spontaneous. Now you're starting to get into more of the implementation of the game. Confidence, mood, and focus. These are more, again, implementation aspects to consider. So now I can tell you when I say that, oh, that's an implementation technique. Oh, that's an assessment technique. Oh, that's a planning technique. Oh, that's an evaluation technique. Now you know what I'm talking about, right?
Makes sense.
Yep. So same thing like when I bring up the basic concepts of small group formation, and I mention Tuckman, and I talk about forming, storming, norming, performing. So when we're evaluating a game, we'll talk about, so what phase is that group in? How are they doing? Are they, they're obviously at the forming phase. Have they made it the storming phase? Are they starting to get norming? Are they performing? Where are they at on that? Some of the ideas he has here help with getting through those phases, getting from storming into norming. He often brings up topics related to norming. Some of the roles he talks about that people fall into are kind of norming expectations that are being defined. So we start with these kind of higher level concepts, and then as we go through the RPG specific stuff, I now can reference those for you. And that's where, reading those essays and those videos and such helps too, so that we're using the same language. But at this point, if there's nothing else, we'll go ahead and start continuing our Robbins Laws of Good Game Mastering, if you're okay with that. Unless there's anything else you want to bring up. Nope. Okay. Actually, tell you what, I'm going to go grab a glass of water because my throat's getting really dry. And then we will start. So give me just a minute. I'm going to switch the video to, we'll be right back here.